size, because, oh no, now we're recording it.
Yes, now we are recording.
Now we're recording it. Do I get a little clicker?
Yep. Clicker.
Let's see if it works. Uh-oh, we out of ports? No, there should be one more on that side. Bam. Ta-da. Thanks.
Second one.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to.
I can.
Yep.
Still got a minute
Alright.
anyway, right? It is.
Are good.
All right.
Hello.
That's good.
Somebody else said that too. I'm not that wired. I'm not wired that way. I'm wired to worry about it.
Worrying, come on, as a realtor, you worry until the last moment that that transaction goes through. Because at any moment, things could just be tossed in the air and you start again. And you're like, what just happened? We were good to go until X. All right, so welcome guys. I am Heather. So let me start off by saying, as a school teacher for many, many years, I have no problem with being interrupted. I'm well used to it. I taught middle school for 17 years. So stop me if you have questions. If you need to use the restroom, have a great time. This is not a classroom. You don't have to ask for permission like they normally do. That's because we try and keep boys and girls out at the same time. You guys can be trusted. So today we are going to go over the next level CMA. So the plan is to actually make this into a two-part. This is going to be part one. Part one of this is going over what is a CMA? How are you going to make it? What kind of information do you need to gather for it? What does it look like? And then part two is the second piece of this, which is what can I do with my marketing now? What does this mean about this property? How do I use this to my advantage? The kind of information that as a listing agent, you want to know because you need to figure out who is your target audience. Who do you need to market this to? Because once you have your CMA, you know your price range and you know the features of your property, which is huge to being able to target it to the right person. So when you're going to do Facebook ads, when you're going to do a web page with the SEO information on there, all of that kind of stuff, you're going to want to have your CMA done so that you have your specific target in there. So there's me and my scary size face. And now it doesn't like me. It's usually the way it works. It's all right. As a teacher, you know how to swing with things when they don't work. All right. So there are three parts to today. First one is the principles of pricing. The second one is choosing appropriate comparables. You don't have to take ridiculous notes because don't worry, we will email this to you. So you don't have to write everything down because there will be a lot of information coming at you. A lot of specifics. And the third part is preparing your actual CMA. So what are the documents that are out there? How can I make my life easier? Because a CMA should take you an hour, maybe a maximum if you have a hard property, 2 hours to do. Shouldn't take you 7 hours. If it's taking you 7 hours, you have made your life super difficult. Nobody has time for 7 hours of a CMA. So the first question is, what does it reflect? So there are three main pieces that it's going to reflect. It's going to be an inspection of the actual property, meaning, does it have a fireplace? What's the quality of it? Does it have a pool? All of those specific things, as well as the neighborhood. Location, location, location. Because it makes or breaks a property. The same property, a half a mile apart, could be $100,000 difference. Why? Because of the neighborhood, because of that location. So that's super important when you're going to do your CMA because you need to keep that in mind. What's going on in the region and the local market? What's our market right now? Hot. Hot on which side? Seller's market. So that means when you're doing that listing side of it, awesome, you are on the bonus side where you don't have to worry about it. Yours is going to get sold. When you have the buyers on the other side, you're really crossing your fingers and trying to make good relationships. But that trend in the market is going to determine how you're going to have to do your CMA because you need to be using properties that have just recently sold. When they're doing an analysis, when your appraiser is doing an analysis, traditionally they can use 6 months. Are they going to use 6 months in this market? not without an adjustment. Because 6 months ago, our properties were not the same value. But here's the tricky part. If you're in a neighborhood, you still have to use that neighborhood. So if they're going to use a property that's in that neighborhood from 6 months ago, there need to be time adjustments added to it. And you're gonna do the same thing with your CMA. And you need a description of the comparable properties. So a CMA is more than a sheet of paper with numbers. You have to be able to show why. And that's what a CMA is gonna do for you. It's gonna tell you the exact reasons why behind it. All right, so true or false, here we go. There are some true ones and there are some false ones up here. So, can be used by a lender for a new loan, true or false?
False.
Why not?
Because it's not a appraisal, it's a market analysis.
So, my second question for you is, why do they need an appraisal for that when it's a new loan? Can a lender use it for any other purpose? Can they use it for a loan modification? Yes. So let's say that someone wants to refinance and they want to get a home equity line of credit, or they want to do something like that. When you're doing a loan modification, a CMA is sufficient for them a majority of the time. Sometimes they will require an appraisal, but a majority of the time, they're fine with a CMA, which means that homeowner doesn't have to put out hundreds of dollars to have that appraisal done. Yeah, they're gonna roll it into their loan. They're still paying for it. So something to keep in mind when you're on the phone with someone and they're talking about, okay, I'm thinking about refinancing, but I'm not sure. That CMA that you create for them, they can go to their bank and say, hey, I have someone who's telling me this is what my house is worth, and they can use that document. They may need it for more than one person, but at least they have a leg to stand on to say, this is where we're currently standing. Can it be used for an REO purchase? Real estate owned, the bank owns it. The bank owns it right now. And let's say a cash buyer comes in, is that CMA enough for them?
Broker, don't they hear broker price opinion, or is it the same thing?
Not necessarily. For an REO, a CMA is usually enough. They don't really do the broker ones, not really anymore, not very frequently. I had an REO and between the two realtors, we did it.
That's more the formal term for a CMA. It is kind of the same thing.
Yeah, only ours comes with our name attached to it and theirs comes with their name attached to it. Because mine has my name on
Broker
it.
price opinion would have your name on it.
Yes, but it also is backed by them. Mine doesn't have their name on it. They're not backing it.
Backed by who?
By your actual broker. No?
You can do that as a single agent.
Okay.
I do a few a year.
So can it be used for divorce negotiations? Sure. Why not? Do we have a problem?
No, I'm adding people into the room.
Oh. Okay. So it can be used in divorce negotiations. They need to know how much that property is worth because they're going to divide it as of that date of the closing. That date of divorce is the date that they're going to use. So because of that, it matters. Can it be used for an appraisal? There's a magic word on there.
No, right, not an appraisal.
You're not an appraiser. Please don't represent yourself as an appraiser. When you create a CMA, there's going to be a statement on there that you are not an appraiser. Don't delete that. You are not an appraiser. It is required by law that that is said on there. And can it be used for a short sale? Yeah. Again, that's the bank part being involved there. They usually require more than one. When I just had an REO, it was my side and their side that came together to tell the bank this is what it's actually worth. That we came to our agreed upon terms. All right. So what information do you need for data on your property? Here's some of the list of things you need to know about that property. Obviously, kind of an important piece. Your subject property is the one you're figuring out. What's the date of the analysis? That's really important because, as you know, the market is changing. So if I sit here and say, as of this date, this is the price, and 4 months later, someone pulls up that CMA, is it still accurate?
Totally.
Not necessarily, not in a changing market. What's a changing market? 3% change in your 6 months. And that's an ever-changing market. That's a crazy number right there. You need to know the value or the price of it. What kind of limiting conditions do we have? Meaning, what are some of the things that change on it? The street that it's on. Is it the same for it to be on McCall and for it to be on, you know, Lemon Street? Probably not. It's not going to be the same property. It's not going to be worth the same value when it's on a very busy street. Any kind of market data. Again, it's the market of the moment. It's that date that matters. Again, that notice of the CMA, that piece is going to be on there. That has to be denoted on there. To do a full CMA, it's going to have that, and you'll see it on mine at the top. You need a disclosure about the exterior. What did we see when we looked around the outside? Broken windows, stucco that's falling off, foundation cracks, any of those things would affect it. So you're talking about the exterior. The interior, again, anything major that you see. We do not care if it is clean or not. That is not relevant. Dirt comes off. But it's the structure itself. If you go into a room and your ceiling's falling down, is that going to affect the value of the house? Small amounts, but it is, because the physical structure is still there. But hey, if you come in and there's a roof leak and it's leaking through, is that going to affect the structure of your house? Oh yeah, that value is not the same. And that's, you know, a really good point that we have to make to people all the time. Because let's see if I can manage this. Can I come over here? I can. That's an important piece that we have to mention to people all the time, because what's the number one place where everyone goes to figure out how much their house is worth? Because it's not us, because that would make life easy. Thank you. And what does Zillow do? How do they determine their market analysis of what it's worth? They take the neighborhood, they take the square footage, they take the amount of bedrooms, a comparable property without actually looking at anything, and they throw the number together. So when you walk into a house of something that's not remotely updated, where everything else in the neighborhood's been completely updated, that person is probably unrealistic about what their house is worth. They probably have no idea. They're telling you it's worth 250 and you're like, so here's my market analysis and here's where I came up with this, and you're giving them those limiting conditions. You're on a busy street, that's going to hurt your value. I walked around the outside, you've got cracks in it, you've got problems with your foundation. I walked around the inside, you have a leaking roof. All of this is going to detract from value. That's what your market analysis is going to provide by them. You need to tell that it's a realtor. And if there's any sort of a conflict of interest, you have to say that. So if it is a family member or something of the nature, you definitely need to denote that in there. Oh yeah, I just changed screens, so now it's not going to work anymore. Come this way.
Do you have a sample of what language to use if there is a conflict of interest?
It's going to, I can give you one, but it should show up on the CMA that's on Stellar. So what matters? Potential negatives, that busy street, the fact that the yard is much smaller than it would normally be, the fact that it's on a corner is both good and bad depending upon the two streets that you're on. If you back up to the main highway, that's not a good thing. If you're 2 minutes off of I-75, that's not a good thing. If you back up to a green belt, it's a good thing. So these are all things that matter. The age. So what doesn't matter? Does it matter the age of the house? Does a 1975 house appraise the same? Or when you do your market analysis, is it the same as a house that's a 2005? No. So what's our magic number? Depends on how many comps you can get. If you can get enough comparable comps 5 years before and 5 years afterwards, that's the number I always aim for. So when I run the age in Stellar to pull up my comparable properties, I usually try 5 years before and 5 years afterwards. So if I have a 1985 house, I do 1980 to 1990. And I see what comes up. How many sold properties were there that meet my other criteria? How about the amenities? Does it matter? What are some of those amenities that matter?
How many of those do you pick out of those?
We'll get there. How many comparables to use? We'll get there.
Community pool.
Community pool. The number one thing people ask me for. Community pool. But is every community the same, even if it has a pool? No. It's definitely not. So you're gonna try and stick in that community. The problem that you run into is maybe they've only sold one house in the past year in that community. Now what? Where do you give and take? Number one is to stick into your location. That's number one on there because the value in your location changes the, hi, do we need more? No, we're good, okay. Blake walked and walked. So number one is to keep your location because it can change from one to the other. But amenities definitely change. You may have a private pool. Does that make a huge difference? Yes. Can it also hurt you? Yes. If you have a pool that is falling apart and covered, it's not really a great selling point. Don't put it in there because it's not going to add value to your house. If it requires $20,000 to get it back to working condition and all set, it's not going to add value to your house. If as a matter of fact, it's going to probably be a potential negative. You now have a death trap in your backyard. Ugh, not really a great selling point.
You gotta have someone waiting.
Okay, someone on iPhone. Hello, iPhone.
Hmm.
Whoever you happen to be. Hold on, I gotta get to the right screen. That's over here and admit. So the date of sale, the number of bathrooms. There are certain things that are expected in potential communities. In townhomes, quite often, there's a half bath on the first floor. It's expected in many communities because the regular bathrooms are all upstairs with the bedrooms. So they expect that there's going to be a half bath downstairs. So we're not telling people to truck up the stairs to go visit. That is expected. If it is missing, it's going to hurt the value of that home. For sure. Now I got to go back and click. You don't like me. Why don't you like me today? Floor plan or style of it, Florida is pretty consistent. But what's one of the style things that changes a lot between, let's say, the 80s and the 2000s?
Covered,
Huh?
covered.
Cupboards? Yep, absolutely.
Roof requirements.
Roof requirements. Early 2000s. If you're doing evaluation, early 2000s, it's going to change a lot because of Hurricane Charlie and how things changed. So keep that in mind. Vaulted ceilings make a big difference. A 10-foot ceiling does not feel the same. Well, let me rephrase that. An 8-foot ceiling does not feel the same as walking into somewhere that has vaulted ceilings. Just doesn't have the same appeal. So when you're going to look and compare, that's going to matter for you. Number of bedrooms. So here's a question for you. I go and I look up this community. I'm trying to stick to my community, and all I have are 3-bedroom homes, but I'm trying to sell a 2-bedroom in there. What do? Do I go out of that community, or do I stay in that community where there's a difference in bedrooms? What do you think?
Stay in there and do an adjustment.
Stay in there and do an adjustment. Be careful though, because the number one thing that realtors do is we overcompensate for that adjustment. Because traditionally, what happens, a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, along with that smaller number of bedrooms comes smaller number of square footage. It's probably already changed in your price difference. Don't compensate for it twice. Be careful not to do that. It's really common that we do it because we're like, okay, smaller bedroom's gonna take away money. Not necessarily if it's already coming out in your square footage, because you're gonna make that adjustment. Improvements. They've added granite. They've done all of these amazing things. They've changed the cabinets. Probably didn't change it to cathedral ceilings. Maybe they added new lighting. New lighting, kind of minimal, but they completely updated your flooring. They did all of these different things. How about the garage size? What do we expect in Florida?
Size matters.
Size matters, especially in your garage, because it is hot. And I do not want to get burned every time I get into my truck. And that's what happens in Florida. So your garage size matters. But if you're looking at older homes in Englewood that are smaller on the square footage, maybe 800, maybe 1,000, are you expecting there to be a garage? Probably not. And that's an expectation of that price range. So when it's there, it's a big bonus. But when I'm talking about a 2,000 square foot house and they only have a single car garage, what's that going to do to the value? It's going to slam it. Because it is an expectation at 2,000 square feet that I have 2 vehicles and I need a 2-car garage. That is an expectation at 2,000 square feet. It's very abnormal not to find that. And that size, square footage is key. But you're gonna accommodate for that. So, looking at our accurate picture, location, location, location. Stick to your neighborhood when you have one. But what if you don't have a neighborhood? What if it's not in a community? It just says Englewood. Doesn't tell me anything about a community. It's just a random house on fill in the blank street, Lemon Street. I don't know. There probably is one of those. It's Florida. We have them all over the place. Suburban, small town. You look for the same neighborhood, you look for the subdivision. What's your magic distance? Is a 1 mile radius, as long as it sticks in the same schools. Look at your elementary school, because it can change the quality that people see based on the elementary school. Your middle school is probably gonna be the same in a mile. Your high school is gonna be the same in a mile, but your elementary school could change. Yes,
Okay, so I know you stick to the location and all that.
Yep.
right? But say you're doing one and there's like 3 developments right near each other, within a mile.
okay,
Okay, one is definitely deed restricted, more.
yep,
Okay, and then one is kind of middle of the road, and this one isn't quite as nice as
Yep.
one, but they're pretty comparable.
right,
Okay, and then I see, I'm looking for a 2-bedroom home, right, I'm doing a CMA for a 2-bedroom home. I'm not finding any, but I find one in this community over here within a mile, but it's in a different community. Do I go with a 3-bedroom in that exact location, or do I go within a mile to a 2-bedroom?
stick in the same community.
Okay,
Because what happens is that when you have a developer who comes in, they don't build at the same level. So getting an Adams Homes cookie cutter is not the same as getting an Express Home cookie cutter, is not the same as getting a Del Webb. They're all very different in the level that they're gonna put. So the base price in that community will have been different to start off with. So when you're looking at that, you wanna try and stick to that community and then do your adjustments within that community. You really don't wanna stray out of a community because the pricing is so specific within one. As long as you can stay there, where you run into problems is if you're the first person to sell in a community. I have one of those that's happening right now. So they're comparing it to new construction and then doing the difference of how much new construction changes over time. Because here's the problem with new construction. New construction signs today on a contract. It gets built. 10 months later is when they actually execute that contract. So the date is 10 months after they actually sign for it. What has happened in our market in 10 months?
A lot.
Big differences, but they're already signed over here 10 months ago. So as a CMA, if I'm looking in that community, I have to say what has happened in 10 months in my community, still pull the contract from the original purchase, but I'm gonna have to time adjust it back 10 months because that's the reality of when they signed. So new construction gets a little sticky and you really hope that you don't have one of those, but if you do have one of those, you have to do a time adjustment on it. And that's the hard part because they're signed so far in advance that really they're on the market of 10 months ago. 10 months ago, it was crazy here and now it's gotten even crazier. You know, how much have prices changed? So you really want to stick in a location as much as you possibly can. So let's say that you're city or urban. You want to try and stick in the same condo building. You want to be as minimal as you can. Because picking this high rise that's on the beach is not the same as this high rise that's on the beach, most likely because the price to buy them new was not the same. The amenities that are included in it aren't the same. The view may be different because this one is on the point, this one is further down. I don't know, I'm not on the beach.
So let's go back a minute to,
Okay.
if you do the price adjustments 10 months, so you would take that completed construction after the 10 months and bring it back to that time zone.
I would figure out my time difference of 10 months in the market, how much have prices gone up?
Okay,
I would take 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, I would do an analysis over here, just do a general analysis for 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, as much as you can in that area at all, that zip code, whatever it happens to be. Do it again over here. In theory, they're pretty comparable to each other for an average overall. You're not getting specific at this point. You're gonna look at the price difference. How much did it change? If it changed 5%, I'm going up 5%. If it changed 10%, I'm going up 10%. do a general analysis and say, where am I at this pinpoint? Where am I at this pinpoint? And now look at it. And that's in a community, because communities take less time to build. When you're looking at a new build that's out of a community, make sure you take them out of your CMA, because they're not accurate. Because they're 12 months ago. It closed now, but 12, 14 months ago is when that was actually signed on. Building's taken forever right now. But your home is probably not the same age. Don't pull up a 22 house and compare it to a 1978 house. It's not gonna be accurate. But they wouldn't be in the community together. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, city urban, you're doing that condo, same neighborhood, that's a much smaller, it's a half mile. So when you go into your search, you can put your address and say how far from it you're willing to go. If you're out of a community is when these things start to matter. That's when you're gonna use your distance, when you're out of a community. Because communities are not usually 1.5 miles wide. Unless you're Lakewood Ridge, then they're giant. And then rural, which we don't really have too much of, maybe if you go to Arcadia, you're gonna do a 5 mile radius. We don't have too much rural that we would deal with. Doesn't like me. Nope. All right, the magic number. How many comparables do you need for it to be an accurate CMA? We have 3.
3 or 4.
3 or 4?
I'll go for it.
3? Give me a number.
Well, going back to when we were talking about that,
Mhm.
you said 5 before, 5 after on the A.
That's years.
Right. But then how do you dwindle it down to the perfect 3 or 4?
Yep, exactly. So you're aiming for 3. 3 is your minimum. So how do you dwindle it down? You're gonna get as specific as you can to your property. What are some of the things that you're gonna look at? We're gonna go back to that slide. So, no, we're not. This is how. You're gonna look at these pieces. And you're gonna look specifically at each one of the properties and try and get as many of these things as specific as you can. So when you look at your property, print it out, look at it and say, what are my negatives? How many bathrooms? How many bedrooms? What's my age? What's my size? What's my garage? What improvements have been done? And write it all out on your property so that you can say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is the reality of the home that I need to compare to. Once you've done that, every time you look at a new home, you now have a list of this is where they're off. And in a second, I'm going to show you what I do first is I run a quick CMA on Stellar, and then I jot notes on there. And I say, this one has carpeting, this one has a shed, this one's completely with new windows, this one has impact windows. I do all of those notes on there. I take out pools if there's no pool. I add in pools if there is a pool. That's a big one in Florida because it's a huge sticking piece for us. That's one that I really try to stick with because value-wise, it makes a big difference for us. But these are the reasons, and this is what you're gonna pay attention when you're figuring out your 3 comparables. You're gonna look at these pieces and say, okay, this is my home. This is where it kind of gets a little sticky. And this is where you may need to say, I am not an expert in this, I need help. Most of our homes that we look at are single family residents. Sure. Okay. Single family residence is great if it is zoned to a single family residence. But what happens when it's zoned agricultural? What happens when it's zoned single family or multifamily? You have an old 1960 tiny little house that's sitting on a half acre of, I don't know, possible multifamily. Is the value of this tiny little single family house, really what is best for that property? And that's where it can make a big sticking difference. If they're trying to sell it, and the reality is that there's no land in that area for someone to go and build that condo, that home could be worth a lot more money. But the number one thing that you need to look at is, what's the best value for that land? If you are talking about a piece of land that is a third of a mile from the beach in Venice, and it is this old ghetto house, and I did look at one with termites eating it, and I was fearful when I walked around there that the whole house was coming on my head, because I went outside and kicked the wall and half of it came down, and I was like, oh, that's not good, my bad. Well, I wanted to see if anything moved. Yeah, the whole wall. My bad. Sorry, apologize. It was definitely a tear down. But the value of that house was pretty high. Why was that value high?
The land.
The land. So that value was what is physically possible and legally permissible. Is it economically feasible? It's gonna cost them money to rip it out. Yeah. But the reality is that that land doesn't exist anymore. In Northport, if you have an old house that is falling apart, that is in the middle of Northport, is it likely that that land is worth a lot of money? No, because there's so much land in Northport. But when they start throwing the new industrial area that they're talking about building, that is in the middle of no man's land, all that land that's around it is suddenly gonna go through the roof. Because now it's gonna have city water brought over there. Because you have to have an industrial area. So all of that makes a difference. And that's where you have to figure out the phlegm, yes, I didn't make it up, or the phlegm. Is it physically possible, legally, economically, and maximally possible? So that's the situations when this matters. And you may not know. You may have to call the city and say, hey, I have a question about zoning. They're more than happy to talk to you. I deliver chocolates, by the way, if anyone likes them, I have plenty. Sorry, people on Zoom, I can't give you chocolates. You're far away, come back. They'll be very happy to have a conversation with you. All right, roadblocks. What are some of the things that you need to keep in mind? What gets in the way of the value of a house? Distress sale. When is it a distress sale? Someone dies. They have to sell this property. They don't have the money right now to keep it up and going. They're concerned the bank's gonna take it. Or someone right now is backwards in it. They need to sell it. They lost their job. There's only one person because of COVID. Someone passed away at all. Now it's a single person trying to raise a family without the second income coming in. Those are distress sales. Here's the challenge. Distress sales don't necessarily show up when you're looking for comparables. You won't know that it's a distress sale unless you have a conversation with that realtor that says, why was this so off on the value that I'm coming for this house? And most of the time a realtor will have a conversation with you. Someone calls you and says, hey, I find the value that was sold for really, really low. Why? And they go, oh, well, the brother just died and they had to sell it immediately. Well, that's why. Furniture in the sale. Welcome to Florida. People pass away. Now all of a sudden there's an entire house full of furniture being sold with it.
With a boat.
With a boat. Throw the boat in there. I mean, why not? And the car that's in the garage. Yep. Yay! It's a cash deal. We can do that. Is that an accurate comparable to use? Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how much that boat is worth. I have no idea. I can probably guess on a house full of furniture, but I'm lost on the boat. Be careful and read the description of things. There's a reason those descriptions are there, and hopefully the realtor on the other side did put that information in there so that you know that there's furniture and other things. No pictures. It's common practice in certain markets. Ours isn't terrible about it. As soon as a house is sold, the realtor yanks the pictures off. You'll have a front picture and that's it. What does that do for you when you go to make comparables? You have no idea. How can you possibly know? Sometimes you can go and ask that realtor and say, hey, I'm trying to do a comparable. I can't really find anything in your neighborhood. Could you share the pictures of that house with me? And sometimes they will say yes. And other times they will say no and tell you where to go. But generally speaking, if that's the only house that you have for comparison in that neighborhood, you may need it. But a lot of times there's enough that you can just throw those out. Changing market, again, watch that timestamp. You don't want to use something that was a year ago without accommodating for that time difference. You can use it if you're in a neighborhood, just make sure that you've accommodated that time difference. Estate sale. but they don't always make a difference, but sometimes they do. And you'll notice that in the deed of who owned it. So on the bottom, sometimes where it says owner, it'll say da-da-da-da-da, estate. Those are usually ones that I try not to use because they're not always accurate. Because with an estate, often comes furniture, often comes this, often comes that, it had to be done quickly. It kind of changes the game a little bit. Short sales and foreclosures, not many of those currently in this market. I make no guarantees for what's coming. When we start having short sales and foreclosures in the future, I'm not saying it's coming soon, who knows? Then you need to use short sales to compare to short sales, foreclosures to compare to foreclosures, because those are not even. The amount of headache that comes with that concept is not the same. All right, so we're gonna make life easy. We're gonna use the MLS because I don't know about you, but I am not good at reinventing the wheel. It's round, it works, it's perfect. So use the templates that are in the MLS. You were mentioning before, what do I use and how do I do it? So I'm gonna run a search in the MLS and I'm gonna come up with some of the specifics about my property and I'm gonna come up with a list. This one has 2 active when I run it and 2 pending when I run it. Is that enough?
What you want sold?
What does active tell me?
So market,
Competition.
Competition. What's out there right now? You're going to use your active when you're figuring out your list price because you're figuring out who you're comparing your property to. That's where you're going to use that. What does pending tell me? How quickly they've gone off the market. These came off in 2 days. They were priced right. How do I compare to those properties at this price point? But what do I need to use when I'm doing a CMA? My sold properties. Active's great, pending's great when you're trying to figure out your list price. Be careful using them in a CMA because this price that is pending right here for $204,000 does not tell me what it's under contract for. It could be under contract for $225 because there was a crazy bidding war, or it could be under contract for $195 because they wanted it gone. I have no way to know that pending price. And generally speaking, if you call a realtor, they won't tell you because they're wondering if later it's going to go back on the market and you're going to be the person who's putting in an offer. So usually they will not answer that question. So that's active and pending. But I take a list of my solds and then I write notes right underneath it. And I say, carpeting throughout, fireplace and living room. And then I go to the next one and I say, what are my differences between these? And that's what I use when I figure out which properties I want to compare to. Which ones am I most like? So I jot a few notes on here on my sold one, and that's what I use to compare it to. So that's how I narrow down which one of my 3 am I really going to dig into. And that's what I use to figure out my criteria that I'm going to list on my CMA. Because when we go into the nitty-gritty of the hardcore CMA, wrong letters, I got challenges. CMA, when we go into the nitty-gritty of that, that's where you can say things that don't normally come up in there. Flooring somewhat comes up, but you make your accommodations and you say, okay, this one has tile throughout, that's gonna add to that one because mine is well concrete right now. Or whatever it happens to be. This is where you're gonna put those things in there. Adjustments. So there's different ways to make adjustments. There's a cost-based adjustment. This is what everyone wants to use that actually has done updates to their house, but it's not what's usually used. So cost-based this is something that is normally anticipated to be in the home that isn't there and should be there. Meaning the air conditioning unit that's stolen because the house has been vacant for 6 months and someone stole the AC unit. There was a time when that was super common. It was great. So there's a missing AC unit. It's normally there. It's expected to be there. How much money is it going to take to get that into there? That's when you're going to use a cost base. A majority of the time, you're going to be using that market based. So you're going to compare two sales, and we're going to go over that in a second. And you're going to look at what's expected. Like I was talking about with that bathroom, with that bedroom, with that garage. Those are the things that you're going to be looking at. So there's different ways to make adjustments. Which one do you need to use? It depends on the property and what you're looking at. So here we go. This is the paired sales. Paired sales. There we go. This is the most common. I'm gonna look for a 3-car garage home. That's what I'm trying to compare to. Most of them in that neighborhood have a 2-car garage. Everything I have to compare to has a 2-car garage. But I need to do a comparison. So I need to figure out how much is that garage actually worth? How much? It's not how much to build it, because that's not really a good idea right now. It's gonna cost you a whole heck of a lot of money to extend your roof, extend your concrete, do your pouring, do all of these things, do the permitting, not a good number. So this is where the number comes from. When you're figuring out your value, you're gonna pull 2 homes in that neighborhood that have a 2-car and 2 homes in that neighborhood that have a 3-car that are similar as you can get. Because here's what you're going to do. House A sold at $255,000. It has a 2-car garage. Everything else in these houses is the same. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, all of these other pieces are pretty doggone similar. There may be a few differences here and there, but overall they're close. B is another 2-car. It went for $255,500. C has a 3-car garage. It went for $260,000. D went for $261,000 and it has a 3-car garage. So how do I figure out how much that garage is actually worth? You take your 2-car minus the price of your 3-car, both times, and you get a value. And you do it again the second time, and you get a value. And you look at these 4 numbers. I got $5,000 difference, $6,000 difference, $4,500, and $5,500. Those are the numbers that I get for how much this garage matters in these properties. And then I take my median. I go to the middle. And you can use 5,000, or you can use 5,500, or you can use the average of the 2 and use 5,250, and it does not matter. That's totally up to you. But that's the overall idea of how most values are created. Because it's how much the market is willing to pay for it. It's not how much they paid for it. They probably paid $10,000 for that garage upgrade. That's a standard price to go from a 2-car to a 3-car at a build time. If you were to put it on after the fact, it's probably more like 15 to 20. Because now they have to put an additional roof. They have to do all these other things. But the value, when they tell you I added a 3rd-car garage on there, that's all it's adding. It's not adding $15,000 for them. They want it to, because that's how much they paid to randomly add it after the fact because they needed it, but that's not the value of it. It's only what the market is willing to take. How much is she willing to pay to get that 3-car garage? There's your number. She's not willing to pay $10,000 for it. Certainly not 25, even though that's what the person put. And that's where people run into problems when they do upgrades and they expect to get their money back out. This is the conversation, and this is where that number comes from. And this is the data to be able to say to them, I understand that you spent $15,000 on your additional car garage, but let me show you what the market's actually willing to pay for that. I did this evaluation. Here's 4 homes. Here's what they came out as. That's how much that extra car garage is on there. I wish it was worth more for you. That's what the market is willing to pay for it. They may not be happy, but that's the reality of it. You put a $15,000 price tag on that 3-car garage and they're gonna not get it. All right, so you're gonna do financing adjustments. What kind of financing adjustments? What does a cash deal do? What's happening right now with a cash deal? Are they going higher? Are they going lower? Are they getting more deals?
Yeah, more deals, higher.
So cash deals have a few things going for them. They're not stuck to an appraisal unless they put that appraisal contingency on there, that Form F. But a cash deal can often come in lower than a loan can and still get it because there's less humdrum added to it. FHA and VA have those inspections. They're super fun. Maybe they did an interest rate buy down. So your lender says, hey, we can buy it down for X amount of dollars. So the seller puts $5,000 towards buying that down. That's gonna change the price of that house by $5,000 because $5,000 went to that lender, didn't have anything to do with the value of the house. Doesn't happen so much in this market, but swap this market to a buyer's market and you're gonna get things like that. Closing costs can be prepaid. Maybe there's an assessment. Cape Coral.
How would we know all that stuff?
Hopefully, it's denoted when they go to close it on the MLS. There's sections where you're supposed to put in how much money your seller put. Most of us have zeros right now, but there is a place where your seller is supposed to be denoting how much money got put into that deal externally, meaning how much that seller put in towards closing costs and things like that, because it's supposed to bring the value down and it's supposed to be listed on there. In theory.
You just have to hope and pray that the other agent cares enough.
Exactly. The really great part of it all is sometimes realtors don't know or care or pay attention.
Yeah, 'cause they already got paid, they're just like,
Correct.
close it out.
Sometimes just a few check marks they don't want to deal with. Hopefully it's correctly denoted on there. That's where you would find that information. Date of sale and time adjusted, like I was saying. Huge, especially in the market right now. All right, what do we have to be careful of? Double dipping. So additional bedroom and square footage. If your house goes from a 2,000 square foot house to a 1,200 square foot house, obviously there's going to be an adjustment for square footage. Do you need to also adjust for bedrooms? It's not a great comparison. I really would try and avoid that comparison, but if you're stuck in a neighborhood, it could be challenging not to. Wrong reason to adjust. So this is a big one. Just because someone added something does not mean that it adds value to the house. I have a seller, I just had to have a discussion. I know that you put $35,000 in solar panels on the top of your house. Problem is, that may not add value to your house. You have to have the right buyer for that to add value to your house. I would love to say that that's gonna add $30,000 in value to your house. But the reality is, it's probably not. We're not in a super green community. Now, if they were in California in a super green community where everybody was super worried about it, that would add great value. We're not there.
What about like a pool solar heater, just the small ones? Cause that's not as expensive and it shaves off so much if you were from your electric bill.
But how much really?
For me, it's like 200.
That's a huge electric bill for a pool.
I have 3,
It's usually about 100, maybe max for the heater.
when I turn my pool heater on, it bumps my electric bill up to 340. Maybe even higher sometimes.
Like a luxury item.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you have to look at, you're probably not gonna get the full value of it. You might get a small bump, but it's not gonna be enough that you're making a huge adjustment there.
Well, right, I'm just saying.
It's something you're gonna put in your listing as a selling point, but adjustment value wise, that pool's already in there. The fact that it's heated could make a slight difference, but solar heated, I'm gonna say, is probably not gonna make a huge difference. I mean, I would try and find other properties so you can do that comparison price where you're doing that. Do I need to go back to that slide? Where you're doing the A and B and C and D and see if you can do that and see if you find it. But I can tell you right now, or call an appraiser and ask them. My appraiser told them $0 for the solar panels, and that was the whole house. $0. And they also did a whole house RO system. These people are serious suckers. I love them, but they're serious suckers. They did the $35,000 for the solar on their roof, and they did $18,000 for a whole house water system. I'm like, no. $0 to either one for the appraiser. Not good. Stigmatized properties. What does that mean?
Suicide or?
Yeah, somebody died. Really not a good thing. It's probably not going to be listed. Something that is going to be in seller's disclosure somewhere, but probably not directly on the listing. How do you know? They're usually $10,000, $20,000 under where they should be. Dead body chalk line, not usually a good thing. Caution tape, usually bad. So that's where those outliers come in. When you're trying to figure out your comparables, if you have a middle of the road group of properties, try and stick there. The ones that are on these two sides, either the super cheap or super expensive, usually have reasons for it. And unless your property falls into one of those two categories for a reason, try not to use the outliers. If possible, try to stick down the middle. It's gonna help you.
When you require to disclose a stigmatized issue,
Oh, as soon as you know about it, good times.
make people die, right?
Yeah,
All the time.
yeah.
You don't have to know every time somebody dies in your house.
I don't ask. And that way I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, even if they die.
I have an estate house right now. I have not asked where she died. I don't wanna know. It's on there that it's an estate house. I don't know if she died in that house or not. That's my thought process. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm gonna get in trouble someday. I don't know. I apologize. Maybe somebody has a better answer, but I'm like, I don't wanna know.
It doesn't matter that it's like a violent death or a suicide, any death at all, like natural causes.
I just don't wanna know. I don't wanna have to answer that question. And the problem is if that is a piece that I believe by law you would have to state because it could affect the value of your house. And the rule is if something can affect the value of your house and you know it, you have to disclose it.
We can disclose that, so that was not here, but in Indiana, my grandma passed at home.
Right,
That was her dying wish,
right.
my granddad.
Yeah.
I didn't disclose it myself.
And I mean, when you're the buyer, do you ask when it's an estate sale? No, you don't want the answer. All right, so here comes the nitty gritty one. This is directly out of the MLS. This is the true comparative market analysis. This is full out nitty gritty. Here we go. This is what it looks like. This is what it's going to spit out to you. So the first page has that lovely disclosure. And that lovely disclosure is going to tell you all the nitty gritty of, I promise you I did the best that I possibly could and I used all the standards humanly possible, but I am not an appraiser. It's going to tell you who I am. It's going to tell you the subject property and it's going to give you my lovely bit of information here. On this side are the properties that I looked at for this one and where I compared it to. Song Street is my one that we're comparing it to right here. These are the properties that I looked at. The prices, their actual ones, and then what they got adjusted to. Don't worry, it gets a lot more complex than this. That's just basic information for step one. Then comes your nitty gritty, where it's gonna give you, here is my property that we're actually looking at, and here's the other properties as we go through them. Down here, so it's gonna come up and say, what categories do you want in there? You can add any categories that you want. These are gonna be your standard, your build total acreage, water fronted. These are your standard ones. All of here on up are what automatically come up. You can get rid of them, you can add to them. I added one called flooring, because when I was doing my property has tile throughout. But there were plenty of older properties that had lots of carpeting. That's an allowance. It's not a huge allowance, but it is an allowance. It's something that matters. Because people are gonna change that. Impact windows or replumb. Does it matter at this age house when it's a I think this is a 78, somewhere in there, 1979? Does it matter in 1979 if it's been replumbed? Yeah, because they're due. Does it matter in a 1995 house? No, you shouldn't have to replumb a 1995 house. If you do, there's bigger problems. Something else is going on if it's been completely replumbed. And I'd be super nervous if I saw a 1995 house that had been replumbed. Something's going on. Probably Chinese drywall.
There's lots of them in Port Charlotte that are still 1950s.
Right. And the question is, has a 1950 house been replumbed? That's huge. Because if not, and it has copper piping, it probably has pinhole leaks. At this age, it probably does. And it's going to have to be redone.
And aluminum wiring.
Aluminum wiring, everybody's favorite. And everybody always says to me, what does that mean? I'm like, it means it gets found in your inspection. They're gonna look at the wiring and they're gonna determine whether or not it's aluminum wiring. Once you know that, if you are the sales agent and someone backs out because of that, you now have to tell anyone else that comes along that it has aluminum wiring. can't sweep that under the rug. Once you know, you have to say. But all of that matters in your comparative market analysis. Updated interior. Mine's not updated. But there are some of these that are very updated. So as I'm looking at that, that's where I said, okay, what kind of price adjustments do I need to make? Where's my number? Carpeting, it's a number that you're gonna have to say, and I always get err on the side of, you know, price per square foot on the low side. Because I don't wanna be way off in the other direction. I don't wanna be inaccurate that way. But you're doing this,
How do you determine these things? Like, how do you estimate them? What they're worth?
So the best way to denote is that price-based comparison. Do you have time to do it on every single thing? No, but you can estimate how much money, and this is where you get a great group of people, where if you need a question answered about, all right, I have, you know, a 1979 house, how much to do 2 sets of glass doors and all the windows to the rest of the house? Give me a general estimate on how much that would be to do impact windows. That'll give you a number. You can call people and just say, I don't need a specific, I'm just trying to do an analysis. Can you give me a general number for this? They'll give you something. Don't be afraid to call and get answers. I mean, a general contractor can give you a lot of numbers. I mean, if you make friends with a general contractor, they are a great person to bounce numbers off of and say, hey, I'm doing an analysis right now. Can you tell me how much to do tile throughout the entire house, 1,700 square feet? You know, there's nothing for you to rip up because it was carpeting everywhere and you're not doing the 2 bathrooms. They'll give you a number. So being able to call and get those numbers when you're doing things like that, that's going to be a cost-based approach. When you're doing things like renovating a pool, it's a little different because that's very taste specific. So that's not going to be a cost-based approach. That's what the market's willing to pay for it. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. This is some other things that it's going to spit out for you. Oh. Really? Hold on, I gotta go on the right screen. Okay. What else are we trying to get? So we're looking for maximums and minimums. Because when you're doing a CMA, you want to know exactly where we're standing. Here's the analysis. The listing price is $169 to $189.5. What did they actually sell for versus a list price? They all have 2 bedrooms, they all have 2 bathrooms. My square footage, remember we were talking about how specific you want to get in square footage? Your maximum that you really want to do, if you can stay in that same neighborhood, is 20%. And that's a big number. So the closer you can get to that square footage, this is in Port Charlotte, this house. There are a lot of houses built in the 70s and the 80s that have close to this square footage, which is why I did not have a problem finding 4 properties to do. So I was able to get super specific in my square footage. And my price per square foot is off by roughly $30. See my years? 76 to 85. How many years difference is that? Yep, 9 years, 5 before and 5 after, unless you're at a major change year, meaning Hurricane Charlie came through. If I have a 2005 house, I don't usually try and go into the 90s because the code changed. So the roof changed, the straps changed, all of those things changed. So it makes a difference in the cost of that house and the price. Watch your cathedral ceilings, but try and keep things as close as they can be. And you'll notice they're usually going to be pretty close to each other. If you have a graph that has something way down here and something way up here, and there's a huge difference, something's wrong. You have an outlier, and you need to look at why is that house an outlier. So if you're in this neighborhood and you're looking at Villa Milano, just built, brand spanking new, just finished selling the last one, and I have one that is $50,000 off from the others, why? Maybe that one had a permitting problem and it took forever for it to be built. Maybe that one's a new construction and none of the others, and they're all the rest of them are resales. What's happening? Call the agent and say, hey, I have a question for you. We were looking at the price of this. It went $50,000 under what I expected it to go for all of them. What happened? And they may go, Yeah, it took us 2.5 years in permitting because they kept changing their mind and these people changed things 20 different times. So their pricing was 2.5 years ago. It's not just the 10 months that it normally takes them to build in there. It was 2.5 years ago. They were one of the first people to sign and they changed it multiple times. Sometimes it's something crazy like that, but that's where your agent's gonna come in, where when you start to see this graph look funky, you need to stop and question yourself and say, okay, what's going on that I have something weird? And I forgot that I just let him in, so now this is messed up again. All right, what else is it gonna spit out? Here's our general summary. What has sold? Here's our totals. Average price per square foot. This is huge. Your price per square foot is what you use to calculate everything. That's what it's gonna boil down to. When all else is the same, it's that price per square foot that you're gonna use to calculate what your house is worth. That's used for everything. Remember when I told you you're gonna look at the specifics in a house and we really hope that they denoted that furniture, that boat, all those great things that people like to put into the listings? Here's the specific information. It's gonna pull it for you. Make sure that you reread those and don't see any of those weird things coming into here that change the value of your house. Reread them, take a look at them. What's in that description? All right, so that's the rest of that. And here's your report. See how close they are? That's a good sign. All right, questions? It's all the same data, just in 20 different ways. Yeah.
Okay, so like you mentioned those weird things, right? So say like one house was sold furnished. Can you adjust for that and or would you just say, no, I'm not gonna consider that?
If you can find enough comparables in the same neighborhood and you can find enough that you're good, try and avoid using it, because there's a difference between old furniture from 1980 and brand new furniture that someone just bought and staged this house and they sold it with it, or a model home that it goes with. So it's really hard to say, this is the value that was thrown to that furniture. When you do that, it creates issues, which is why, as realtors, we always say, take out the furniture and put it in a separate contract so that it's not messing with the value of the house. Because you cannot get a loan on furniture. That furniture can't be in a loan. It has to be yanked out. So on a cash transaction is really where you run into that problem, which happens a lot in the manufactured homes. That's another piece. Be careful you're not comparing manufactured homes to single family, and watch the actual physical structure. Wood frame to block are not going to value the same. So be careful. Sometimes in a neighborhood, you'll have both, or you'll have multiple builders that build in a neighborhood. Welland Park has how many different builders in there, and they're all at different price points. So make sure Welland Park is not Welland Park. They're all different. So make sure that you're paying attention to that when you're doing that. All right, other questions? All right, so there will be a part 2 to this that's going to have what to do with your CMA, how to use it for marketing, all of those pieces. Hope you guys had a good time, learned something, and I will get this sent out to you so you will have all the data since you didn't have to write it all down. Thank you.
You need our
All right,
email address
thank
or
you.
anything?
They'll send it out.
When
Like, we'll
is
grab
that
it.
part 2 gonna be? You don't know yet?
Yes. I don't have that answer as to when, but it will be coming. And thank you all on Zoom World.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather.
Absolutely.
Heather.
You are welcome.
Wow. I was just thinking about
Yes, I know.
Bye.
Hey, Heather,
Yes.
I just thought of something else.
Mhm.
So there's the time frame, right? So you want recent sales.
Yep.
And it depends on the market,
Right.
right? So in this market, you want within 3 months, within 1 month, and